Look, ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't your dusty old Huey. This is the new UH-90 Reaper simulator. The Neuralink avionics are complex. Maybe you should just observe today. The crowd of young, cocky aviators snickered. They saw what Colonel Madsen saw. A small, quiet woman in a flight suit devoid of flashy squadron patches. Her dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. Chief Warrant Officer 4 Anya Sharma said nothing. Her face remained a placid mask of professional calm, her dark eyes fixed on the gleaming, million-dollar simulator before them. She didn't react to the condescending tone, nor the ripple of amusement from the audience of pilots, all of them half her age and convinced they were twice as skilled. But from the back of the observation deck, General Wallace, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, leaned forward slightly. He didn't see a woman past her prime. He saw a stance, a stillness, a coiled spring of potential energy that he hadn't seen since the Badlands of Afghanistan. He saw the ghost of a legend. If he believed that true competence needs no introduction and that respect is earned in silence, not demanded with noise, type professional in the comments below. The air in the Advanced Flight Training Center was thick with the scent of ozone, fresh coffee, and unearned confidence. It was a cathedral of modern warfare, a sterile, climate-controlled chamber where pilots could die 1,000 digital deaths without spilling a drop of blood. For the new generation of aviators, it was the ultimate video game. For Colonel Madsen, it was his personal fiefdom. He paced before the massive wraparound screens of the observation deck, a lion in his own impeccably clean cage. He was a staff officer, a man who had built a career on mastering PowerPoint presentations and navigating the treacherous currents of Pentagon bureaucracy. His flight hours were adequate but long past. Now he commanded simulations, and in this world he was a god. The target of his sermon this morning was Sharma. She had been sent over from Fort Rucker on a temporary assignment, her orders maddeningly vague, to assist in the final validation of the UH-90 simulation software to Madsen. This was an insult. He and his team had been working on this for months. They didn't need assistance from some quiet, aging warrant officer who probably still thought in terms of steam gauges and manual trim tabs. Her silence was what grated on him the most. It felt like a judgment. He talked, he lectured, he pontificated, and she simply stood there, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her posture relaxed but perfectly aligned. It was the posture of someone who had spent 10,000 hours strapped into a seat that was actively trying to kill them. It was a stillness that made his own performative bluster feel hollow and loud. He wanted to crack it. He needed to. So he decided to make an example of her. This wasn't just a briefing. It was a public dissection, a ritual humiliation designed to reassert his dominance. The colonel continued his monologue, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. The UH-90 isn't just a helicopter, he announced, gesturing grandly towards the dormant simulator as if unveiling a holy relic. It's a weapons system, a network hub, a paradigm shift in rotary wing aviation. The collective and cyclic are tied into a haptic feedback loop that anticipates pilot input based on biometric readings. It's not about muscle memory anymore, ma'am. It's about synergy. It's a concept I doubt your generation of pilots can truly appreciate. He paused, letting the insult hang in the air, a poisonous dart aimed directly at her experience. The younger pilots shifted, some smirking, others looking down at their boots, embarrassed but unwilling to challenge the colonel's authority. The room was a pressure cooker of complicit silence. Sharma's expression did not flicker. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Understood, sir," she said. Her voice was low and even, devoid of any hint of anger or defensiveness. It was the voice of someone reporting the weather. This placid response only seemed to fuel Madsen's condescension. He saw her calm as ignorance, her silence as weakness. "Good," he said, his smile thin and sharp. "Because today, we're running scenario 734. It's a particularly challenging one. Multiple cascading system failures in a high-threat, non-permissive environment. Frankly, none of my top guns have been able to successfully navigate it. It's designed to push the airframe and the pilot to their absolute breaking point. It's a total instrument failure, followed by a dual-engine flameout over mountainous terrain. It's an unrecoverable situation. The goal is simply to collect data on crew survivability in a catastrophic impact. He was laying it on thick, painting a picture of certain failure. He was not just predicting it. He was willing it. He wanted to see her panic. He wanted to see the mask of her composure shatter into 1,000 pieces. He wanted her to fail, publicly and spectacularly, to prove his assumptions correct. But, since you're here to assist, he continued, the word dripping with sarcasm, why don't you give it a try? Show these young aviators what old-school grit looks like when it meets new-school disaster. He gestured toward the simulator's hatch. The stick is yours, Chief. Try not to break my new toy. The final insult landed with a thud. Sharma simply unclasped her hands. Without a word, she turned and walked towards the simulator, her steps measured and even. She didn't look at the colonel, nor the gallery of pilots. Her focus was absolute, narrowed to the task ahead. She was a professional, and the time for words was over. As the heavy door hissed shut behind her, sealing her inside the dark cockpit, Colonel Madsen leaned back, crossed his arms, and a smug, satisfied smile spread across his face. The show was about to begin. The world outside vanished as the simulator hatch sealed with a heavy, pneumatic sigh. For a moment, Anya Sharma was enveloped in absolute darkness and silence, a sensory deprivation tank that smelled faintly of clean plastic, warm electronics, and a lingering ozone of computational power. This was her sanctuary. The noise of the world, the colonel's arrogant monologue, the nervous energy of the young pilots, the weight of their expectations, all of it dissolved. Here, there was only the mission. Her fingers found the switches on the overhead panel by touch alone, a familiar geography learned in 1,000 hours of darkness over hostile lands. The cockpit bloomed to life around her. Soft green light bathed the instrument panels, the multi-function displays flickered on, and the world outside the armored glass materialized, a stunningly realistic vista of the Hindu Kush Mountains, rendered in breathtaking digital fidelity. She ignored the view. Her hands began their ritual, a silent communion between pilot and machine. It wasn't a checklist. It was a conversation. Her right hand rested on the cyclic, the stick that controlled the helicopter's pitch and roll. Her left settled onto the collective, the lever that governed lift. She felt the subtle tension in them, the latent power. She flexed her fingers, her movements economical and precise, the gestures of a master craftsman checking her tools. On the observation deck, Colonel Madsen was playing the role of a grand showman. All right, people, watch the main screen, he commanded, pointing to the large display that mirrored Sharma's cockpit view. You'll see her biometrics on the bottom right. Heart rate, respiration, galvanic skin response. A pilot under this kind of stress, their heart rate can easily spike to 160, 170. Cognitive function degrades. Panic sets in. That's the data we're here to collect. The simulation began. Sharma eased the collective up, and the digital UH-90 lifted off the ground with impossible smoothness. She banked gently, the massive machine responding to her inputs with the grace of a dragonfly. She was a part of the machine, an extension of its will. The narrator in Madsen's head was already writing the story of her failure. She's stable on takeoff. Good, he said, his tone that of a teacher grading a simple addition problem. But the system is flying itself right now. Let's introduce some variables. He spoke into his microphone. Simulator control. Introduce weather package Bravo. High altitude crosswinds. 40 knots gusting to 60-inch. The brilliant blue sky on the screens clouded over. The helicopter bucked, a digital lurch that would have sent a novice scrambling. Sharma's hands moved, barely perceptible adjustments to the cyclic and pedals, and the Reaper steadied instantly. She didn't fight the wind. She danced with it, using its own energy to maintain her course. Madsen frowned. Okay, increased turbulence. And let's get to the main event. Initiate scenario 734. On my mark, he waited, watching her fly, almost disappointed by her flawless control. He wanted chaos. He wanted failure. Mark, the world inside the simulator turned to screaming chaos. A cacophony of alarms blared through the cockpit, a symphony of electronic death. Red lights flashed across the panels. A synthesized female voice, cold and robotic, began to recite the litany of disaster. Warning, engine 1 failure. Warning, Engine 2 failure. The whine of the turbines on the audio feed spooled down to a dead, horrifying silence. The lift was gone. The giant, multi-million-dollar machine was now just a very heavy, very expensive rock. On the main screen, the helicopter's nose pitched forward as it began to plummet towards the jagged, snow-dusted peaks below. Warning: hydraulic pressure 0. Flight controls unresponsive. In the observation room, a collective gasp went through the young pilots. This was it, the unrecoverable nightmare. Colonel Madsen's smug smile returned. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice filled with a grim, academic satisfaction. Catastrophic, cascading failure. She's a brick. This is what we call auto-rotation, but in an airframe this heavy, with 0 hydraulic assist, it's a fantasy. A dead stick landing. Impossible. He leaned in closer to the biometric display. Now watch the heart rate. Watch the panic set in, but the numbers on the screen told a different story. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute. Respiration, 14 breaths per minute. Steady. Calm. Colonel Madsen stared, his brow furrowed in disbelief. That can't be right. The monitor must be malfunctioning. Inside the cockpit, Anya Sharma was not panicking. She was working. The moment the alarm sounded, her body had responded before her conscious mind had even processed the words. Her left hand slammed the collective down, flattening the pitch of the main rotor blades. It was a counterintuitive move, giving up the last bit of lift to sever the rotor from the dead engines. The helicopter was now falling, but it was falling under her control. She was no longer a pilot. She was a physicist, managing a complex equation of gravity, mass, and airflow. She didn't fight the fall, she guided it. She traded altitude for rotor speed, converting the potential energy of their terrifying descent into the kinetic energy of the spinning blades. The blades became a flywheel, a reservoir of life spun from the very act of dying. Gravity was her enemy, but it was also her engine. On the screen, the pilots watched, mesmerized. The helicopter, which should have been tumbling out of control, was descending in a controlled, stable glide. Sharma's hands and feet were a blur of minute, precise adjustments, coaxing the dying machine into a ballet of physics. She wasn't flying a helicopter anymore. She was flying the rotor disc itself. She's maintaining rotor RPM, one of the young pilots whispered, his voice filled with awe. Without engines. How is she doing that? The ground rushed up to meet them. A small, rocky plateau, barely larger than the aircraft itself, was her only hope. At the last possible second, just feet from the ground, Sharma executed the final, most critical move. She pulled up sharply on the collective, bleeding off the stored energy in the rotor blades in one final, desperate burst of lift. The helicopter's descent arrested. It flared, its forward momentum ceased, and it settled onto the rocky ground with a gentle, almost imperceptible bump. Then silence. The alarms cut out. The simulation ended, frozen on a perfect landing. In the observation room, you could have heard a pin drop. The smug smile was gone from Colonel Madsen's face, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. It was a silence more damning than any accusation. It was the sound of his entire world being proven wrong. The heavy hatch of the UH-90 simulator hissed open, breaking the spell that had fallen over the observation deck. Anya Sharma stepped out. Her face was the same as when she had entered. Calm, composed, unreadable. She blinked once, her eyes adjusting to the light, and her gaze swept over the room full of stunned, silent faces. She looked like someone who had just finished a routine diagnostic, not someone who had just performed a miracle of modern aviation. The quiet was absolute, a vacuum of disbelief. Then, a new sound entered the space. The slow, deliberate tread of heavy boots on the polished floor. General Wallace moved from the back of the room, his presence parting the frozen crowd of pilots like a ship through ice. He ignored Colonel Madsen completely, his eyes fixed only on Sharma. The general was a man forged in the crucible of real-world command, a leader whose respect was a currency more valuable than any metal. He walked not to the simulator, but to the central command console, his face grim and determined. "Sergeant," he said to the technician, his voice a low rumble that commanded instant obedience. Pull up the unclassified service record for Chief Warrant Officer for Anya Sharma. Display it on the main screen. Now, the technician's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, Sharma's official file replaced the image of the perfectly landed helicopter. The room, already silent, seemed to hold its breath. The file was sparse, almost surgically clean, but the lines of text that were there landed like hammer blows. General Wallace began to read them aloud, his voice resonating with a weight that turned each word into a chapter of a hidden history. Unit classification, Tier 1 Special Mission Unit. The general read, then paused, letting the words sink in. He looked out at the young pilots. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means she belongs to an organization that officially does not exist. It means she flies in places we don't go, to do things we can't talk about. A nervous murmur went through the crowd. The general continued, his voice dropping lower. Flight hours, combat, 7,842. He let that number hang in the air. That's not training hours, gentlemen. That's 7,000 hours flying in active war zones under fire. That is more combat flight time than every single pilot in this room combined, including myself. He pointed to the next line. Awards, Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 oak leaf clusters. The Silver Star. The Bronze Star with V4 Valor. Air Medal with 24 strikes/flight awards. He didn't just read the names. He spoke them with reverence. These aren't participation trophies. Each one of these represents a specific act of heroism under fire. Each one was earned saving lives when everything had gone wrong. He saved the final line for last, his voice laced with a cold, hard irony aimed directly at Madsen. Special qualifications, Experimental Test Pilot, Rotary Wing Division, U.S. Army Aviation Center of Excellence. Lead Development Pilot for the UH-90 Reaper Flight Control and Simulation Software. He let the bombshell land. Scenario 734. Catastrophic dual engine failure is her design. She wrote it. She designed it to be impossible because for anyone else, it is. The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy as smoke. The screen showing Anya Sharma's file went blank, but the afterimage of her accomplishments was burned into the retinas of every person in the room. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer the silence of shock, but the silence of profound, dawning, and deeply humbling respect. The young pilots looked from the blank screen to the small, quiet woman standing before them, and they were no longer seeing an aging officer. They were seeing a living legend, a quiet professional whose actions spoke a language far more powerful than words. General Wallace turned slowly, deliberately away from the console. He faced Sharma, and in that moment, the cavernous, high-tech room became a sacred space. He didn't see a subordinate. He saw a peer, a fellow warrior who had walked through the fire and emerged not burned, but forged. In a gesture that stunned the room more than any of the revelations, the general, a 2-star commander, straightened his own uniform jacket with a sharp tug. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture becoming ramrod straight. He then executed a slow, perfect, formal salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture of superior to a junior. It was a salute of deep, personal, and unequivocal respect from one warrior to another. Ma'am, he said, and the word, addressed to a warrant officer, cracked through the room like a rifle shot. My sincere apologies for my staff's gross and unprofessional assumptions. That was the single finest display of airmanship I have ever had the privilege to witness. In simulation or in reality, Sharma held his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something, not emotion, but acknowledgement showed in her eyes. She returned the salute with a crisp, economical motion. Thank you, General, that was all. 2 words. It was enough. Then, the general's gaze, now as cold and hard as polar ice, shifted and fell upon Colonel Madsen. The colonel, who had been frozen in place, seemed to shrink under the weight of that stare. The general's voice dropped, losing all its warmth, becoming a weapon of pure, controlled fury. Colonel Madsen, he began, his voice dangerously quiet. You are a commander on this base. Your primary duty is not to manage technology. It is to lead soldiers. And the first principle of leadership, A principle you have so spectacularly failed to grasp is that you judge your people by their competence, not by your own ignorant prejudices. He took a step towards the trembling colonel. You assumed her age was a weakness. You assumed her gender was a limitation. You assumed her silence was ignorance. You were wrong on all counts, Colonel. Dangerously wrong. That kind of assumption, that arrogant, dismissive pride, is not just an insult, it is a liability. In the field, it gets people killed. It breaks trust. It corrodes the very fabric of unit cohesion. You didn't just disrespect a fellow officer today, Colonel. You disrespected the accumulated wisdom of a career spent at the sharp end of the spear. You are relieved of your command of this facility, effective immediately. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. We're going to have a very long conversation about your future, if you have 1 inch. The story of what happened in the simulator bay spread through the base like a shockwave. It didn't travel through official channels or after-action reports. It moved through the barracks whispers, the knowing glances in the chow hall, the hushed conversations over beers at the NCO club. It became legend almost instantly. 2 young lieutenants, fresh from flight school, replayed the scene in the mess hall, their voices a mixture of awe and disbelief. They said she didn't even break a sweat. One said, shaking his head. The colonel was ranting and raving, and her heart rate never went above 75 beats per minute. 75? Mine hits that when I'm trying to find a parking spot, his friend nodded, spearing a piece of chicken. And she wrote the program. She built the Kobayashi Maru, then beat it. Madsen thought he was setting a trap, but he was just a mouse trying to trap the cat that designed the maze. In a dusty hangar across the base, a grizzled master sergeant, his hands stained with the grease of 1,000 repairs, was holding court with his mechanics. Heard about Colonel PowerPoint Madsen? He chuckled, wiping his hand on a rag. The old man dressed him down so hard his ancestors in Valhalla felt it. Stripped him of his command right there on the spot. Serves him right. There are 2 kinds of people you don't screw with in this man's army. E4s with nothing to lose, and quiet warrant officers who've been flying longer than you've been alive. Madsen forgot the second rule. The legend took on a physical form. Someone, anonymously, printed a high-resolution screenshot from the simulation's recording. It was the final frame. The UH-90 sitting perfectly intact on the impossibly small plateau, a testament to calm precision. They pinned it to the main bulletin board in the Flight Operations building. Underneath it, in neat block capitals, someone had written, "The Sharma Standard, it became a point of pilgrimage for young pilots." A reminder that the most important instrument in any cockpit was the composure of the person flying it. And what of the quiet professional at the center of the storm? Anya Sharma was oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the legend she had created. A few days later, she was spotted not in the high-tech simulator, but on the sun-baked flight line. A young crew chief, barely 20 years old, was fumbling through a pre-flight inspection on a real Black Hawk, his movements clumsy with nervous energy. Sharma approached him, not with the air of a senior officer, but of a patient mentor. She didn't speak at first. She just watched. Then, she pointed to a hydraulic line. "Check the torque stripe there," she said softly. "See how it's slightly misaligned? It's probably fine, but probably isn't good enough." She didn't berate him. She didn't lecture. She simply guided his hands, showing him how to feel for the subtle vibration that indicated a loose fitting. She was teaching. Her silence invited his questions, and her quiet competence built his confidence. She wasn't a hero performing for an audience. She was a professional ensuring the standard was met, passing on a legacy of quiet, life-saving diligence. Colonel Madsen's fall from grace was as swift as it was public. General Wallace was a man who believed that lessons, especially for senior officers, should be both instructive and deeply memorable. Madsen was not court-martialed or forced into early retirement. That would have been too easy. Instead, he was reassigned. He was removed from his prestigious command at the bleeding edge of aviation technology and appointed the new base logistics and inventory officer. He went from commanding digital reapers to counting crates of boots and boxes of MREs. His new office was not a gleaming, air-conditioned observation deck, but a cramped, windowless room in the back of a dusty, cavernous warehouse known to everyone on base as the Dust Bowl. His new command was not a group of cocky, elite pilots, but a handful of jaded supply sergeants and bored privates who had long ago mastered the art of looking busy. It was a public and profound demotion, a clear signal to the entire command structure that arrogance had a price. One sweltering afternoon, we see Madsen staring at a computer screen, his face a mask of frustration. He was trying to reconcile the digital inventory manifest with the physical count, and the system, a clunky, archaic piece of software, was fighting him at every turn. He was clicking furiously, muttering curses under his breath, the picture of impotent rage. A young specialist, a woman no older than 20, approached his desk hesitantly. "Sir," she said quietly, "you're trying to brute force the reconciliation. The system won't let you. There's a sequence to closing out the sub-inventories first. Can I show you?" A month ago, Colonel Madsen would have exploded. He would have berated the specialist for her impertinence, for daring to correct a superior officer. But the man standing in the warehouse was not the same man from the simulator room. The general's words echoed in his ears. "You judge your people by their competence, not by your own ignorant prejudices." He looked at the young specialist, at her earnest, helpful expression. He saw no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet desire to get the job done right. He saw competence. Madsen took a deep breath, the dusty air filling his lungs. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. He swallowed the hard, bitter pill of his pride. He pushed his chair back from the desk. "Please, specialist," he said, his voice softer than he had intended. "Show me. I'm clearly not the expert here." The specialist smiled slightly and pulled up a chair. As she began to patiently walk him through the process, the narrator within the story would reflect that this was Madsen's true test. Not in a simulator, but here, in a dusty warehouse, learning from a subordinate. True strength wasn't the absence of weakness. It was the humility to admit it and the courage to learn. This was the beginning of his transformation, a quiet, unglamorous redemption far more meaningful than his previous hollow authority. 2 years passed. The world turned, conflicts shifted, and the personnel on the base continued their ceaseless rotation. But some things remained. In the Advanced Flight Training Center, the simulator room had been upgraded. The technology was even more advanced, the graphics more realistic. But on the wall of the observation deck, a simple, elegant brass plaque had been installed. It read, "The Sharma Auto-Rotation, a lesson in calm professionalism." Scenario 734 a new cohort of aspiring aviators. Their faces a mixture of excitement and trepidation stood before it. Their instructor, a seasoned Chief Warrant Officer 3, who had been a young lieutenant in the room that fateful day, pointed to the plaque. His briefing had become a tradition. "Before you step foot in this simulator," he began, his voice serious, "you need to know the story of this plaque. You need to know about Scenario 734. We don't call it that anymore. We call it the humility test to let the name sink in. It was designed by the pilot who perfected it, CW5 Anya Sharma, one of the founding mothers of the Night Stalkers aviation program. The purpose of this test is not to see if you can fly the machine. It is to see if you can fly yourself. It is to teach you, right now, at the beginning of your careers, that your assumptions are your greatest enemy, and your composure is your only true weapon." He then recounted the now famous story. He told them of the arrogant colonel, of the quiet warrant officer, and of the impossible feat of airmanship that followed. He didn't embellish. He didn't have to. The truth was powerful enough. He emphasized the details that had become legendary. The steady heart rate, the minimalist dialogue, the perfect, gentle landing against all odds. She proved that day that respect isn't about the rank on your collar or the volume of your voice, the instructor concluded, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. It's about what you can do when everything goes wrong and everyone is watching. It's about being a professional. The story of Anya Sharma's quiet competence had become more than just gossip or a cautionary tale. It was now institutional folklore, a foundational piece of the training curriculum. It was a tool used to forge better officers, to instill in them the virtues of humility, respect, and the profound power of silent discipline. The single, quiet act of one woman had created a lasting legacy of cultural change. It was a testament to the idea that a true legacy is not a name carved in stone, but an idea that lives on in the actions and character of those who come after. Her silence that day had echoed louder and far longer than any boastful shout ever could. The truest legacy is never a monument. It is not a name on a building or a plaque on a wall. A true legacy is a standard. It is a code of conduct that is passed down, not through regulations, but through inspiration. It is an idea that becomes so ingrained in the culture of an organization that it lives and breathes in the actions of its people, long after the originator is gone. Anya Sharma's legacy was not the story of her perfect landing. It was the generation of pilots who learned from it. It was the young lieutenant who, faced with a complex problem, chose to listen to the advice of an experienced sergeant before speaking. It was the squadron commander who, seeing a struggling new pilot, chose to mentor them quietly instead of berating them publicly. It was the senior officer, like the transformed Colonel Madsen, who learned that admitting you don't have the answer is a sign of strength, not weakness. Her legacy was a quiet revolution of character. It is the silence that follows a perfect action, a space filled not with applause, but with a shared, unspoken understanding of excellence. It is the calm that settles over a crisis when a true professional takes control, their composure a shield for everyone around them. It is the respect that is earned in the crucible of performance, not demanded in the vacuum of rank. It is the profound truth that what you are speaks so loudly that no one can hear what you say. In the end, the story of Anya Sharma became a parable about the invisible architecture of greatness. Elite organizations are not held together by their technology or their funding. They are held together by the quiet professionals, the silent guardians of the standard, the men and women whose profound competence forms the bedrock upon which everything else is built. They're the ones who don't seek the spotlight, because they're the ones who generate the light for others to work by. We see a final, distant image. Years have passed. On a flight line at dusk, a new generation of stealth helicopters, sleeker and more advanced than anything before, are spooling up for a night mission. Watching them from the edge of the tarmac is a woman with silver streaks in her dark hair. Chief Warrant Officer 5, Anya Sharma. Her face is weathered by time and wisdom, but her eyes are the same, calm, focused, and missing nothing. She offers a nod of approval to a young pilot in the cockpit, a silent blessing. Her work is not in flying the machines anymore. Her work is in the pilots themselves. Her legacy is taking flight before her very eyes, ascending into the darkness, ready for anything. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where professional integrity defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.